Firstly, thanks very much for the opportunity to come today. Just before I start, how many of you were in the session immediately before this where Rosie finished up with her presentation? Can I just say thanks ever so much, Rosie. It was a privilege to speak to you afterwards as well. Rosie's got some books and she really doesn't want to take them back to the US. And she's promised me some really uplifting, heartwarming parts of your story in here. Can I ask that you suggest that you pass them out to the audience? And because they're not going to come forward, but make sure that when you get one, write about it, tell others about it, and encourage more people. And the reason I mention that is, Sarah asked me for a one-line sort of bio of what I do. So although I'm here today as chair of Tech UK, Health and Social Care Council, I have been in the industry for nearly 3 decades now. 2/3 of that as chief executive of mission-critical EPR companies. But to get there, I had to do every single job there was to do in the business. Most of them I was absolutely useless at, but I learned how tricky they are. But I also want to mention that I've inherited, we've bought, we've had all kinds of systems that were written in all kinds of languages, all kinds of codes. So about 4 years ago, I decided to move away from that sort of EPR structured area because I do think that what we're trying to achieve here is actually really quite broad. So forgive me if that's a bit of a difficult explanation, but I'm trying to come at this from 3 decades of experience and what I've seen. And I promise you, what I'll give you today is raw. There are no fancy pictures. It is what I've got from the industry. It's what people have told me. It's what I've seen from myself, and it comes from that experience as well. One of the things Lorraine and I talked about last week when we had a little chat about this event was we want to demystify, debunk, and take away some of the things that people carry along. Sometimes people actually don't do the research. They've picked up an opinion from somebody else, they've seen something, and they haven't realized that things have moved along. I'm privileged to say, Lorraine, I've watched the PRSB and you for 10 years. It's been an enormous journey, considering you've spun out of NHS England, and it hasn't been the easiest. And I am thrilled with where you've got to with standards. Gary, we've worked together in London, but I admire you again for what you're trying to do nationally and the pragmatism in which you show this isn't an easy job. There are people who hold titles and roles, I would suggest, don't have the experience and are not qualified. The answer is curiosity, and that's what I'd put to you, is that industry alongside other bodies are as curious. The answer to the question, what do we really think? We want communication, we want curiosity to continue, we want to cooperate, and we want to collaborate. Now, again, it's not always that easy. So I'm going to delve into some of the areas that I've been given. Some of these are not my opinions, but I'm privileged to share. So let's start with some of the good stuff. Firstly, the great thing is that HL7 Fire UK core board is co-chaired. And it's made up of, dare I say, the right people being around the table, having the right sort of conversations in an honest and open fashion. And that is the way to get things done. It's to build the relationships. And I've been party to some of the relationships that haven't been easy, and getting people to actually sit in the room together over many, many years. When you do get them together, it is amazing of some of the things that have come along. However, one of the challenges is the prioritization. What do we focus on, in what order? And I think that's been discussed. That is going to continue to be an issue. Social care has an equal seat at the table in all areas. That's fantastic. It shouldn't really be a question, but I have to say social care is often the poor relation in health and social care. And the HL7 is deeply involved in the development of the HL7 Fire UK core. So that's really, really good. Areas for improvement. So homework. And again, I put these up so you can capture them. These are raw as they've been given to me. More use of international standards required. I think, Lorraine, what you're trying to debunk here is actually international standards are really starting to be are actually quite comprehensively used, but not ubiquitously. The HL7 core interoperability specifications need to be implementable. Well, what does that mean? They're not at the moment, but how much are they, and what do we need to do to get that done? I would suggest continued dialogue, and my theme here is the suppliers do want to be at the table. We know it's a privilege, but there needs to be more supplier engagement at all levels. Development is slow and currently developed centrally, and the team that's doing that has downsized during the recent downsizing of NHS England. The feasibility of supporting the information standards from the PRSB. We've already talked there, and the criticism has been that some of these have been too big, but you've also said, look, we've got the minimum ones as well. Again, as an EPR chief executive, I know that I underestimated some of the standards that we had to implement and the cost of that. And some of them, I remember projects where I thought, yeah, I'll put 3 of my guys on, 6 months, we'll have it knocked out. 3 years later, 7 full-time people and 6 months of conformance and witness testing, and we just about got there. So, and I'll come back to what does that mean for the supplier community? Why is it challenging? And perhaps why some of the suppliers aren't as forthcoming as they need to be. With DPDI coming down the line, standards are being mandated in law, is there consideration being made for certification capacity? Will that be part of the process? What if it was defined as being mandatory? I think, Rosie, you gave an excellent example in the States where it went into law. Look at the exponential growth of opening up those records. Is that what we need to do here? I'm not sure it will come with the current DPDI, but what is it that we actually need to do? So, frankly, this sort of evidence I've been given today, I got 20 years ago, 15 years ago, and 10 years ago. I haven't got the time to be doing it in another 5 years. I'm sure you don't. So what can we do to move this along? Inadequate visibility of the standards and the confidence for the suppliers to invest in the support of those. I'm going to come back to some things that I've seen, experienced, but also things that I'm guessing with some of our suppliers who find it harder to meet things sooner. And the last part here is that more honesty from NHS England. Look, stuff goes wrong, and I've been very privileged in my role as chair at Tech UK in lots of interactions across NHS England when silence says to us, there's something not right. Why don't you just tell us what the challenge is? And when that happens, everyone gets a bit more relieved and the conversation gets a bit more real. So that, for me, goes under the hat of communication. The open interoperability standards. Does the NHS use enough industry standards that already exist? That's the question that's put. There are many proven standards, and why aren't we using more of those? I have to say, from a supplier point of view, when you're answering procurements, it's much easier if people were corralling to more existing standards. But suppliers can be lazy because they want to win the competition, they want to win the revenues and the work, so they will bend to what it is that you're asking for. I'm pretty privileged in my position. I can say things that other suppliers will not because they need to protect their brand, or they need to protect their revenues, or they're frightened of their shareholders. That's perfectly reasonable. The UK core not being implementable. So I've left quite a lot of the text up here now because there seem to be 2 main reasons for this. And what we've created in the fire specifications, are they adequate for developers to use? We still have no APIs necessarily defined. And what we're trying to do here is a new endeavour. Now, I remember when we set up, I think we signed the Newcastle agreement in 2016. Interopen was set up and supported, so the industry wasn't waiting for the NHS to tell it what to do. But that was in 2016, I think, wasn't it, David? 17, something like that. And we've still got an awful lot more work to do. And I think, is progress fair over that period? Personally, I'd suggest not. I think we could have done way more, and we can do way more. And that means, to me, the challenge actually over the next 2 to 3 years, we need to set some, I think, pretty firm targets. We need to make some decisions and some prioritizations. That's my personal opinion. Development, oh, have I gone? Forgive me. Oh. I may have lost the heading, which is why I'm confused. Forgive me. So, development being way too slow. Currently, the UK core, the team that's producing that, seems to have lost some of its resource, and that's really slowing things down. I don't know what we can do about that, but the suggestion is, why don't we do co-production? Really try some more of that. And this, Lorraine, you'll be really pleased. I did say you'd like this part. So, the work that you have been doing has really been recognised. I mean, I think in absolute fairness, the example I've already given, there are, and you've been really honest and open. I agree with every part of your presentation. Some of the data items in the data sets are needed. They are required. I remember doing a dynamic discharge data document, I think with 37 components, probably 12, 14 years ago. But it wasn't ubiquitously rolled out or asked for. And that's, a real challenge. So there is a place for standards, but I'm also going to jump forward to the last part of your presentation, whereby we do not have to wait to be told to do this by any means. And there are great examples where it has already been done, not just here, but all around the world. And I put it to all suppliers, but I also put it to you as users and buyers of services. to demand more of this and ask curiously, but not necessarily to criticize. And quite often we all criticize. Suppliers criticize customers, believe it or not. And it does come the other way around as well. But actually when you get in a room and you understand that we have a core passion to support all of our families and everything that we're going through, and at some point in your life, as again, I think, Rosie, you were very kind to explain, you had a young 25-year-old who said some really unfortunate things at an awful stage in life. And some people don't have a life experience. And Gary's just come from the centre and said, those people don't have the experience. I'm working with people at the centre. They don't have the experience, but they are charged with things. We're working with politicians who don't have the experience, but they'll have a title and they're charged with things. But we, the community, and I support Gary in what he said, we, the community, all of us, I think, have more power at our hands than probably we realise. But, sorry, I went off topic a bit, but the PRSB is doing a fantastic job, Lorraine, in all practice. Conformance testing, I've given you an example. Conformance testing, it's a cost. It's necessary. It's highly important that we do get these things right. But it's not necessarily industry's fault that it's taking a while here. And what is it that we can do to speed this thing up? And I've got to tell you, everybody's paying a cost the longer it takes. Not just the end users, but the companies are paying for this, whether it's a hospital, whether it's a shared care record. The lack of visibility of standards being developed. I'm kind of really shocked at this still being an issue. But then we have lost so many people at the centre. There's been so much reorganisation over the last couple of years that we do have to take into account. And I did say 2 years ago, as a vice chair of Tech UK, we as industry need to be patient. It's going to be painful the next 12 to 18 months as things change. But I think our call now is, look, please invite us into the room. And when stuff isn't going as well as it could, don't be ashamed to say why. It's much better to be honest and say, this has slipped. This is honest, this is just the way things are. But bring us into the room so that we can contribute. And quite often, as a supplier, as an independent, and as somebody who is fundamentally a patient and clinician advocate, I want to walk into the room and contribute anything that I can to move the agenda forward. Not everybody kind of finds it that easy, but actually if you create the right environment, then hopefully we all move forward together. That's suppliers, that's end users, that's the people who've got to run and implement our systems. Increased transparency and honesty, particularly from NHS England. Some examples here. I have to compliment and I have to thank particularly David Hancock for so much of the input that he's given here. It's not the only part, but actually you're also representing Interopen, your experience, and a lot of the organisations that have contributed to this. This is another example going back to 2016. Things slipped. It wasn't great, but then there was no update for quite some time, for quite a couple of years. And, a couple of years, it's easy to say that, but every single day, people's care, their well-being, and frankly, their life, is not being helped when we're not doing these things better. We all know that. Forgive me if I sound like I'm sort of nagging and bagging the drum, but, I don't think years and decades is fair and reasonable on some of these things. Pragmatism and community. Yeah, and I think a really great point, David, you made it well. Radio silence isn't good. Talk to us where you can, even if you can say, just because we haven't got the right people around the table at the moment, we don't know what the structure is. Okay, let us help though. We don't have to stop working. Some of our non-UK first suppliers, I haven't got any feedback from those, but I can tell you one of their big problems is because we're not their first market, we will never be at the top of the list to get stuff done. It is not uncommon for things to be on a roadmap that's 2 to 3 years out. It's not easy to necessarily change those things, but there are other technologies and capabilities that actually we can work around. I think, Gary, as you said, sometimes you just got to take what you've got and you've got to work with it. And some people are doing that really well. But there are homegrown suppliers who have made this journey difficult as well. And I think there are pressures that can be brought to bear, but using technology to get as much data out and meet the standards and share the information where's needed. And I'm just wrapping up now. I do think there's more opportunity for data platforms. I don't think there's one single data platform that will fix anything. Actually, I think they can coalesce, they can complement, and I'm a huge fan of innovation and also competition. I don't think we should be putting everything into one data platform, but there are different ones that do different things. You've mentioned some earlier this afternoon. We're aware of the rollout of the federated data platform, but there are some really good, not necessarily highly publicized examples of where structured and unstructured data is being used. And I kind of want to bring this back. The topic is about standards, but fundamentally it's about getting the right information in the right place at the right time. Whether that standard is complete, whether it's ready, whether we meet it. So, personally, I don't think we should be limiting ourselves about getting information into a usable format, and we should be open-minded to what kind of platforms. And, we have had examples. One that I've worked on and been privileged to work on in London, alongside Gary, we've got 3 ICSs and 7 million patients worth of data that's normalized to SNOMED CT, and where it's not, there's a library of ontologies and code sets of over, I think, 2.83 million. It's open source, but we haven't found a way to expand that outside of London, use it elsewhere. There'll be criticisms about its age or what it's not good at, but it is an example of actually being used real time and live today. So, we're not just looking at 1 or 2 vendors to do this. And the premise of that was, give us your data, we'll organize it and we'll send it back. That's not talking about standards, but it is talking about the use of data to meet the standards of care and the things that we need to do for care flow and for treatment of patients. And use the advent of natural language processing to get to some of the information that we need. They've been around for a long time, and again, they're not ubiquitously used and deployed. But if we have more collection of data, whether it's standards met or not, then we can utilize that, again, to deliver better care. And I think my final point here is there are invested suppliers who do not want this to happen. They do not want ubiquitous amalgamation of data because it actually challenges their business model and their business profile. However, and I'll put it again to the suppliers that might be in the room, the more that we share, the more we all move forward together. And that is really difficult when you've got sort of shareholders who don't necessarily understand that. But actually, it's the right thing to do. None of us are owners of data, we're custodians of it. And I think the more that we move, the more that we can make data available, the more that we can bring other suppliers along with us. We must never lose sight of what it is that we're trying to achieve, which is back to supporting all of us through life and care. And my role here isn't as chair of Tech UK or as a CEO of my companies. It is as a patient and clinician advocate. I think, and I'm going to just take a gamble here, having watched standards and interoperability and integration over the last 30 years, I know we're not going to fix it next week, but I don't think it should take another 10 to 30 years. I do think the potential with large language models might remove some of these challenges, or they'll certainly accelerate the ability. So I don't think we should stop anything that we're doing by any means, but I do think that the new technologies, maybe it's a 4 to 10 year period from here. That's just it's an estimated guess based on that experience of watching things move. What do we do in the meantime? We've got to keep cracking on, haven't we? Thank you very much for the opportunity.